back with another episode of the Branders Magazine, Talking with Branders podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Bacanza, and today in the studio, we have Emmanuel Probst, the global lead in brand thought leadership for Ipsos, one of the top premier market research companies probably on the globe. And if you don't know who they are, you will after this episode. And Emmanuel's new book, Assemblage, is out now, and we're going to be diving into all things market research for your brand. Emmanuel, welcome to the studio. How are you today, sir?
Stephen, thank you for having me on the show. I'm good, and I can sense you have a lot of energy. So I'm going to ask you, how are you? But you seem to be in a very positive mood.
I'm just caffeinated. I guess that's how we can look. A couple espressos in, and here we are. But I have energy and passion for all things branding and all things customer experience. That's why I'm really excited to have you on. For those that don't know who you are, maybe take 60 seconds and give everyone the Emmanuel Probst story.
Yeah. My story is I started in market research 18 years ago. I do three things. As you said, I'm global lead for brand thought leadership at Ipsos, which is the largest publicly owned market research agency in the world. And I'm also an adjunct at UCLA. At UCLA, I teach consumer market research. And then I do some writing. And as you said, in my latest book, Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation, is the book that explains why brands can no longer just sell products, but must also transform people and the world they live in. So the conduit between those three occupations, if you will, is I like to understand why do people do what they do. And as marketers and brand professionals, how can we influence people to not just buy our products, but also make smarter decisions and provide people with products and brands that are more meaningful to them?
You definitely have no shortage of things that you're touching, right? I know being an adjunct is a tremendous amount of work at times, and so really kudos to you, Emmanuel, for doing all that. When we first connected, what I was excited to chat with you about is throughout my career, I've always used market research firms, testing ideas and concept testing, and should we go with this campaign or that campaign? But a lot of everything always boils down to this idea of like insights. And I think insights is one of those words that maybe gets watered down and people use in the wrong context. So what is an insight from your perspective, and why should brands really try to gather great insights to push their marketing forward?
An insight is something new, surprising, expressed from a consumer standpoint, or I would say from people's standpoint. That is what an insight is. To better articulate this, as marketers, we're very often bubbled. What I mean by this is we listen to great podcasts such as yours, Stephen. We also read publications like Ad Age and Adweek and Campaign and what have you. We go to conferences. We often live in big cities, Los Angeles, New York, Tri-State, Chicago, San Francisco, you name it. Last but not least, we know way more about our brand and our category than anyone else. All this is great, yet it introduces a bias. You know too much about all this. An insight is listening to people, not even consumers, listening to people to understand how they perceive your brand, how they perceive your category. The insight is a fact. It can be a keyword, and it can be a new context for using the product. It can be a new usage for said product. And it can be scalable and validated in quantitative research. That's good. But an insight can also be anecdotal and qualitative in nature. And that's also very insightful.
One of the things, I've had a lot of strategy directors and VPs, as they formulate their the strategy philosophy inside of an agency walls, very much, live by the sword that data is not an insight, right? That just having a data point is not an insight. Yet I feel like there's a lot of branders out there that just stop there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you for saying so. You're dead on. Data, I'll put it two ways. We're we're data rich and insights poor. With big data sets, you have a lot of data points, lots of signals. You have to decipher what's meaningful and what not. You cannot fall off your seat because your brand went down half a point yesterday after some buzz on social media that lasted for 2 hours. Or another way to put it, which is a little bit cheeky, as the Brits will say, is to say data sets are like bikinis. That is, they reveal a lot, but they hide the essential. And so data is so important. And we live in a world that's data rich. And clearly, the biggest companies, they're successful not so much because of the product, but because of the data. What I mean by this is Amazon, for example, doesn't own many stores at all if you exclude Whole Foods, and yet knows so much about your path to purchase. And the same reasoning applies to Uber, that doesn't own any cars, yet knows so much about mobility. And the same reasoning applies to Netflix and to Apple, and we can go on and on. So the data is the wealth of knowledge and the wealth in terms of revenue. What you have to know how to do, where you need guidance, is indeed extract from that data what is meaningful and transform those insights into revenue opportunities. That's trickier than staring at those large data sets with hundreds of millions of data points.
I adore what you just said, that we are data rich and insight poor. I think that, with that, there are too many people, some of us branders out there that think, oh, the more data, the more, the client is going to think that we know their business. But really, that human truth, the why behind the why behind the why behind the why, um, oftentimes is not, taking, it's not data. It's just that's what's so fascinating to me about strategy and about creating insights. What was it, Emmanuel, that prompted you to write assemblage? Like, why did you feel that you needed to put your words into a book?
Yeah, I take a step back as a marketing professional, and I think there is an opportunity for us to create better products and better brands. I think that there is an unprecedented opportunity for marketers to make a positive impact on people and the world around us. I think that we can both move products, sell things, which is what we're here for, and again, make this positive contribution. If I look at how the industry evolved from, the 70s, Don Draper, Mad Men, at the time, ad agencies were about selling cigarettes and alcohol. We can still do that. Yet again, we have a larger role to play. What makes me think so is we see in our studies at Ipsos that individuals, consumers, citizens, patients are keen on listening to brands to educate them on specific topics. We also see that people expect brands to take a stance on key societal issues. We see that people expect brands to make a positive contribution to the economy and economic recovery. So, for all these reasons, that was the standpoint for the book, to say we're overwhelmed with brands and most people don't care about most brands. People wouldn't care if 78% of brands were to disappear. There are very, very few brands that command true fandom. You'll talk about Airbnb and Apple and Nike. Well, that's great. But in this industry, we always fall back on the same 12 case studies, if you will. So I wrote this book because I believe in this opportunity of moving products, building brands that are differentiated and distinctive, and making a positive contribution. And this book gives you a blueprint. It shows you how to do that.
When you say positive contribution, it
Mhm.
reminds me of the TV show Silicon Valley, and they were
Yeah.
okay, and they were quasi making fun of it. But every brand in their elevator pitch is like, "Oh, well, we solve X problem for Y person, and we want to make the planet a better place.
Yeah.
Has that become like a bullshit statement? Like, what did that even mean?
Yeah, well, that's because it is. It's funny because I watch part of the show, and indeed, they all want to make the world a better place.
Right.
Which, by the way, the Silicon Valley is an example of a bubble of people talking with them to themselves and with themselves and at themselves in the mirror. And in my opinion, that's why so few innovations cut through, because really, what does it do for the users and how is that
Yeah.
beneficial? So the metaverse, for example, well, what does it do for me? Why do I care to have an avatar in the metaverse? I personally do not. And considering how few people use the how few active users they have, obviously I'm not the only one thinking so.
Yeah.
So back to your question, too many brands try to be everything and they try to tick the box. And what I mean by this is, I'm not saying that every brand should try to save the planet. I'm not saying that every brand should have a brand purpose and a mission statement and a key ESG mission and all that. I'm saying you pick and choose what works for you, but also what aligns with your brand identity and what you want the brand to become. It's no longer good enough to slap a statement or a tagline. You also have to demonstrate that behavior. So when I say that the brand can make a positive contribution to education, for example, well, an example is a technology brand like Google or Microsoft can educate you, the individual, on how to keep your data safe, can educate you, the small business owner, on how to market your services and products through social media and other digital capabilities. That's what I mean. I'm not saying that Google and Microsoft have to save the world. I mean, they can if they want and if they can. I'm saying, though, that there is an opportunity for Google and Microsoft to educate you on digital skills. That's one of many examples.
It's almost like, and I think you called it out, like too many brands are just checking the box because
Correct.
it's a fad, right? Oh, checking that box, just like sustainability might be a box they check, or purpose, right? Like you had said. You mentioned earlier, Emmanuel, this idea of fandom. I want to come back to it. Like, what is um, I read a great book. I'm sure you have too. It was called Fanocracy. Was that what it was called? I forget. There was this idea of building fans, and as a musician, I think about some of the bands that I'm an absolute fan of, and one of those bands is Kiss, and they have
Mm.
built such a flywheel of merchandising and branding. Um, but that happened, starting in the '70s when life was seemingly a little bit simpler. Now life is complex, and you mentioned metaverse, and there's all this Web3 stuff happening. What's it going to take for a brand to build absolute fandom in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Kiss, or you could have mentioned Iron Maiden, or Black
Mm-hmm.
Sabbath, or maybe Guns N' Roses, or U2. The, those folks, though, by definition, music is not functional. It's about vibration and delivering an emotional benefit. So the short answer to your question is brands need to overwhelm people with positive emotions and with a sense of belonging. However, once again, that is the more functional, the more commoditized the product is, the harder it is to deliver on this. And just like we said earlier, Stephen, that not all brands need to advertise a brand purpose. By the same token, the truth is not all brands can develop that dedicated following. So if you take Apple, the the belonging is there, the sense of belonging is there, the product makes you look smarter, the product makes you look cool, and it's well designed, and it's a group you want to belong to. That's the concept of tribal consumerism. You want to be part of the cool folks that carry an iPhone 15 around. By the way, the iPhone 15 is 50-60% more expensive than competition, and the camera is not as good. You don't care so much for the functional attributes. You say you will, but in fact, you don't. You care about carrying the iPhone 15. When you drive a Ferrari, the car is notoriously more expensive than anything else. Ferrari's margin is north of 40%, which is 4 to 6 times more than anyone else in the auto industry. Oh, and by the way, the cars are, from what I hear, I don't own one yet. From what I from what I hear, are pretty unreliable. But the emotional benefit of driving a Ferrari, because it looks cool, because it feels fast. By the way, you cannot even drive it fast. Not going to drive. I believe you're in New Jersey. You're not going to drive at 200 miles an hour on the turnpike.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
No, not
So
happening.
so you buy the dream, you buy the sense of belonging
Buy
to a
the
group of
dream.
special people. Now, that's easily said in the context of Apple or Ferrari, where the emotional value of the brand is so high, the brand love, the brand desire is so high, and therefore, as a brand, you can charge huge premiums. Same thing, Apple's margin, I think, is 44%. Now, let's think about bleach and let's think about toothpaste. Do you know many
Yeah.
people around you who think, I'm so proud to belong to the Clorox tribe?
Yeah.
And they grab that bottle of Clorox that they deliberately choose after 12 minutes of thinking through, should I buy Clorox versus Target's Up and Up? And they walk out of the store thinking, so proud to own that bottle of Clorox. No, nobody thinks that way.
Right.
And so your question, and it's a long answer, but your question is, how can brands create fandom? And the truth is, many brands cannot create fandom.
Yeah.
If you stand out with distinction and difference and saliency, that's good for you. Yeah, for our listeners and viewers, I'm realizing by saying so that maybe just like most people in our industry, I should sell the dream and tell you that you can become the next Apple. In all reality, in most categories, you're doing well if you can achieve, again, difference, distinctiveness, saliency, that your brand can be chosen by more people more easily and more often. That's your win.
Yeah. I think about a brand like Liquid Death that's on
Yeah.
everyone's mind, and
Okay.
I mean, what a unique recipe that they were able to bring together. And I say that, all pun aside, like water, there really is no recipe to water, but it was everything else that they did, and they're absolutely creating
They are.
ravage fans.
Yeah. So Liquid Death is a beautiful case study. I'm with you on this, Stephen. It's a mix of what at Ipsos we would look through the lens of shaping expectations, harnessing the context, and acting with empathy. And what I mean by this is, I'm going to start with context. The bottled water industry is responsible for pollution all over the world. What was once the unique selling point of plastic bottled water on the go, and what made them famous since 78, is now detrimental to the industry because consumers no longer want to pollute the ocean. Also, 73% of water sold in the US is actually tap water. It's not spring water for whatever cool mountain. So the context that Liquid Death was able to harness is to say, let's make it in a can that is pretty much the only thing with glass that can be recycled almost in infinitely,
Yeah.
in infinity. In that regard, they're surfing on that wave, pun intended, on the ocean, that people no longer want to buy plastic bottles. So that's very well played. Then the creative idea is very salient. It's an assemblage, back to my book, of this, call it death metal culture, Day of the Dead type of, as applied to the water category, which usually is very clean, very pure. We
Yeah.
show mountains and girls dancing around in white dresses with long blonde hair. So
Yeah.
the saliency of this creative idea is second to none. And then the empathy is about the environment. So shaping expectations, the last one, is really about reshaping expectations for people towards the water category by telling the market it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a plastic bottle. It can be a can, and a can is cooler, and it doesn't break, and it doesn't pollute the environment.
The saliency of a creative idea, their whole kind of philosophy is this notion of death to plastic, right? Plastic is their mortal enemy. Does when we talk about saliency of a creative idea, does it have to have a mortal enemy, like to make an idea really good?
It's interesting you say this, because in the book there's a chapter about anti-heroes, villains, and saviors. And villains can have a great emotional value because because we like the villain, because villains are sympathetic in their own rights. So there could be a moral enemy. The enemy becomes more sympathetic and relatable if it's embodied by a character, if it's personalized by someone. But hey, once again, just like we said earlier, you don't necessarily need a brand purpose. You don't necessarily need a mission statement or a sustainability agenda. It's better if you do. And by the same token, you don't necessarily need a moral enemy. That is the definition of a cult. There's a chapter in the book, there's a section in the book about the marketing of cult leaders. And one way cult leaders do so well is by instilling a divide of us versus them.
Yeah.
And us versus them means if you're on the outside, you cannot understand, right? So that's cultish. You can do this, it works, but you don't have to. I think at the end of the day, reflecting on everything we discussed so far, Stephen, is do not try to do all of the above. I was going to say, do not try to do this at home.
Right.
Don't try to tick all the boxes. Don't try to do all the above, because that's how it ends up in some sort of hodgepodge of corporate lingo that nobody is going to relate to. Pick what's on brand for you and what is true to your brand identity, your vision for the brand, and who you really want to be.
It's like sometimes brands overbrand and they go too much, right? Like they try to be cute. They try to be, I think you said this earlier, they try to be everything to everyone. And in doing so, you're diluting your message, you're diluting your brand, and you're not necessarily connecting or creating a good human customer experience. To that point, Emmanuel, going back to what we were talking about in the beginning with insights, how might brands utilize this notion of insight gathering and constantly becoming more knowledgeable to deliver more personalized experiences, knowing that personalization is absolutely paramount to success these days?
Yeah. Okay, let's be honest about personalization. That's where data comes to play. And let's be honest, that's where bigger brands are at an advantage. And when I say bigger brands, it's importantly brands that can collect, analyze, combine, and monetize data. And that's why Amazon has way more leverage than Costco, for sake of argument. I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. That's when a brand selling through Amazon has more leverage than when selling to Costco. That's because if you sell through Amazon, you can target 13,000 psychographic segments in the US, versus when you sell through Costco, you get volume and exposure and you get shelf space. That's so important. However, very little about people buying your product. You certainly don't have those great targeting capabilities. So I think that's something to be mindful of. But back to your point about personalization, what brands can do is get closer to people to reduce the social distance between the individuals, people, consumers, and the brand. By how do they do so? By delivering a more personal experience. How do they inform this personal experience? By keeping track of insights and trends and what people want to do. Don't get tactical straight away on how do they want to use the product and is my brand better than X and Y. Start with what are people trying to achieve. That's section 1 of the book. how is the brand going to contribute to your identity project? Your identity project is who are you and who are you trying to become? The individual is the hero. The brand is here to support the individual, the consumer, in this quest of
Yeah.
becoming the hero. The brand has this supporting role, and that's how you do it.
The hero's journey you've alluded to right there with the hero and the
Yeah,
brand playing the role as the guide in a way. I like that you
exactly.
say, get closer to people, and it's I say this all the time, and I'm a philosophy nerd.
Hmm.
Zeno had always said, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. We should listen more than we speak, and not only should I listen to that, but our brands need to listen to that. Where they if they engage with their customers and approach, have open and honest conversations. I think the customer feedback loop is going to be so positive, and what you're going to get out of it is so monumental. So thanks for sharing all that. Um, one of the last things I want to ask you, Manuel, and this is I've been waiting to ask you this question because it's so intriguing for me, but it's around Picasso,
Hmm.
and I'm a quasi, I'm not an artist per se, but as a musician, as a writer, as just somewhat of a Renaissance man. This is very intriguing. So, what does he know that marketers need to know?
Picasso was a genius marketer. He started poor, he ended up very, very rich. Um, Beyond being obviously very creative from an artistic standpoint. And here is why. First, he was one of the first ones, arguably the first one, to simplify his brand. His full name is like 12 words long, but he was one of the first ones to simplify his brand. Before Cher or before Zendaya. Okay, it's much easier. His full name is Pablo Ruiz Picasso. That's his full name. I was blanking, and so I just googled it while we were talking, Stephen. Um, but going by Picasso, well, that's a brand name again, just like Cher, just like Zendaya, just like Madonna at a later stage in life. So the branding move in and of itself, uh, to simplify and clarify this personal brand, was there. Also, Picasso could do paintings. However, he also created so many other product lines. I'm not talking about licensing, but he was doing sculptures and china and potteries and so many other things, also adapting his art to the market, whereby you can sell paintings at 20, 30, 40,000, 200, 300, 400,000. That's great. And you use this as a leading product, as a beacon, as an aspirational product, so that you can sell your china and your posters and your lithographs. And now, what I'm saying, you see this all over in the fashion industry, whereby when Balmain comes out with a new collection, or Chanel, or fill the blank, Yves Saint Laurent, uh, how many people really buy those dresses at catwalks in Paris, Milan, and New York? They sell 20 a year, 30 a year, 40 a year, because very few people are willing and able to spend 50, 60, $70,000 on a dress. So those catwalks don't really make money. That's not the point. The point is that's the aspiration and the inspiration to sell the perfumes, the handbags, and that $650 Balmain t-shirt, which I am not an expert in supply chain management, but when you sell a cotton tee at $650, I'm assuming that the margin has to be, you know, about 30x, right?
Yeah, it's
And
substantial.
so back to Picasso, so that's where Picasso was leading the way, and by being so not just creative, but also prolific, creating a lot of arts across a lot of channels, lots of mediums, so that it latches on with one audience or another.
Like you had said, he's a case study in maybe not just marketing, but in branding, in even brand extensions, right? Although you can
Indeed.
imagine, there are things that he probably tried that failed. We see that with Da Vinci and all his drawings and all his innovations that he tried to push to market but didn't. But it's so fascinating to think about these older figures who are no longer with us and they can't, they can't testify on their own behalf, how we can kind of dissect them now and, show how above the time they really were. Who else might be in history? Let me put you on the spot, Emmanuel. In history, like who else do you think was very deliberate in pushing out their own personal brand as Picasso was?
The pushing out the right personal brand, you mean?
Pushing out their personal brand. Like Picasso
Oh,
was
their
very
personal brand.
deliberate, and so who else comes to mind that they did it deliberately at the time?
Oh, that is a tough call to say if they did not do so deliberately. I'm very careful when people say I didn't do so deliberately, because often it's very well orchestrated, So if you take Lana Del Rey, for example, Lana Del Rey failed initially. Um, she was singing under her real name, which is Elizabeth something. And she then rebranded herself as Lana Del Rey. And so she became successful with a combination of what people wanted to hear and her creativity, if you will. But I
Mm,
think that was, well, I don't think, I know for sure that was very carefully orchestrated. They scraped the internet off her past failures and they rebranded her into Lana Del Rey. Her first video for video games, it was meant to be shot on her phone in her little apartment in LA. That makes for a good story. Let's keep in mind that her dad was increasingly very is maybe a very wealthy man and was able to inject a lot of money into getting her started. So that's all to say that we can think of many people that created strong personal brands, and not only in music. Karl Lagerfeld is one in fashion, Yves Saint
yeah.
Laurent is one in fashion. Um, and also personal brands in technology, whether it's Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and Bezos and, of course, Zuckerberg. See, Zuckerberg is another example of, let's not forget, this was an accidental success and
Hmm.
an idea that was stolen from his roommates in Harvard. And by the way, the initial purpose of Facebook was not exactly humble. It
Right.
was um,
It was like a rating, hot or not. Yeah, kind of what it
it
was.
was a, yeah, exactly. We'll leave it at that. It was a rating scale.
Yeah, which
We'll
would
let our
never fly today.
exactly. So all this to say that I believe that most moves in branding are carefully orchestrated. 10 minutes before joining you on the podcast, Stephen, I was reading about um, Taylor Swift
Mm,
is going to attend some football match. And guess what? Viewership interest for the NFL is ramping up. Merch sales are ramping up. Taylor Swift is a singer, artist, songwriter. With all due respect, adapt that she knows how to throw a Hail Mary. And that's not the point. Was Taylor Swift at that football match really that randomly? And is it that random that all of a sudden she pays interest to football?
yeah,
Or how convenient it is that Taylor Swift has the traction, the audience, that she can bring a younger, more diverse, and um, more feminine, potentially, audience to a sport that was aging and being a sport for bros. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just being very careful, just like celebrities dating. How convenient was it a few years ago when uh, David Copperfield, the American magician, was allegedly dating Claudia Schiffer, who was a German model, considering that David Copperfield needed to build his brand in Europe and Claudia Schiffer needed to build her brand in the US.
Yeah.
So, so those moves in branding, for an overwhelming majority of those moves, I think, are carefully orchestrated and they're not accidental in any way, shape, or form.
No, I mean, so many good nuggets, listeners, that you could take away from Emmanuel. I certainly got smarter chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to checking out the book. And I'm very familiar with Ipsos, and maybe one parting question, because Ipsos lives in data and in research. Um, are you all scared of what AI is going to bring to the world as marketers?
AI is going to bring to marketers what Excel brought to accountants and
Good
what
analogy.
US foods brought to restaurants. And what I mean by this is you can standardize and automate and scale the tasks that are low value add um, and pain in your rear end, if you will. What AI doesn't do is the creativity, the insights, the consulting, the guidance. And in that regard, I think there is an opportunity to leverage AI. So let's take some examples. Let's be honest, there is very little value add in translating a survey, for example. There is very little value add in coding open-ended questions. I could come on your show and brag about how Ipsos does it best. I mean, we do a very good job. But again, I don't think those are unique differentiators in any way, shape, or form. So instead of paying people in the United States at US rates to do some coding or some translation or things like this, we can automate those tasks and have our people focus on where the real value is. That is, and we'll end this conversation where we started it, on extracting the insights that are most meaningful to clients and provide our clients with guidance on what to do next.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Emmanuel, it was so great having you on the show. You are a wealth of well articulated knowledge, and I'm looking forward to reading Assemblage. Assemblage. I don't know why I put a European accent on it. But for all of our listeners, tell them where they can get in touch with you, where they can purchase the book, where you live on the internet.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. My name is Emmanuel Probst. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And that's because I post articles, content all the time, 3-4 times a week.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work we do at Ipsos is on there. Of course, everything's free of charge. So there's so much free content you can access and content that's up to date. The book is called Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation. And of course, it's available on Amazon. Importantly, you can listen to the book. So it's available as an ebook. It's also available as hardcover, of course, which you can see behind me if you're watching. And it's also available in a audible format so that you can listen to the book on the go or at the gym. And last piece of good news is I am not the one reading the book. So that way you can actually understand what the book is about.
Oh, Emmanuel, I thoroughly enjoy you. For more on us here at Branders Magazine, go to brandersmagazine.com. You can check out the magazine and you can check out all the latest podcast episodes. And for more on me, well, I'm at stephenbacanja.com. And until next time, guys, peace out.